Hi, I am Sophia. Welcome to True Payback, where story hits different. Hit subscribe. Let's dive in.
The invitation came on a Tuesday. Not a text. Not a call. A formal, printed card slipped under my apartment door by my mother's housekeeper, who apparently still knew where I lived despite the fact that my parents had spent the better part of 3 years pretending I didn't exist in any meaningful way. Sunday dinner. 6 p.m. Your presence is required. Required. Not requested. Not hoped for. Required, as though I were a contractor being summoned to fix something broken, which I would later understand was exactly how they saw me. I stood in my hallway holding that card for a long moment. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Marcus, my COO, flagging a term sheet from our Series C lead that needed my signature before markets opened Monday. My assistant had already blocked the calendar. My legal team was on standby. We were 48 hours from closing the funding round that would push NovaBridge's valuation to just over $90 million, and I was standing in my hallway reading a cardstock dinner invitation from people who believed, with complete sincerity, that I worked a mid-level admin job at a small software firm downtown. I set the card on my counter. I signed the term sheet. Then I called my mother back. "Sunday," she said before I could speak. 6 o'clock. "Don't be late, Maya." "I'll be there," I said. She hung up without saying goodbye. She'd been doing that for years. To understand Sunday dinner, you need to understand the architecture of my family, how it was built, who held the load-bearing walls, and how early they decided I was not among them. My father, Gerald Whitmore, was a civil engineer who built his reputation on precision and control. He measured everything: budgets, outcomes, people. He had a specific image of what success looked like, and it looked like my brother Derek. Structured, corporate, legible. Derek wore suits to family dinners even when there was no dress code. Derek had a title on a business card and a salary with a comma in it and a 5-year plan he could articulate in 30 seconds. Derek was, in my father's vocabulary, a man who made sense. I did not make sense to my father. I had dropped out of a perfectly good computer science program at 20 to build something I couldn't fully explain yet. I had turned down a corporate recruiter at 22 to take a founding role at a startup that had no revenue and a team of 4 people working out of a converted garage. I had moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood my mother described as concerning, and driven a used car for 4 years after I could have afforded something better, because I was pouring everything back into the company. From the outside, from my family's outside specifically, this looked like failure in slow motion. My mother, Patricia, was not cruel in the way that leaves marks. She was cruel in the way that leaves questions. He never screamed. She tilted her head with a specific angle of concern that communicated disappointment more efficiently than any raised voice. She asked questions like, "Are you eating properly? And have you thought about what happens if this doesn't work out?" in a tone that made it clear she had already answered both questions on your behalf. "Your sister has a degree and a pension," she said once at a holiday dinner when I was 24. "She has a plan, Maya. That's all we're asking. A plan." I had a plan. I just couldn't tell them what it was yet. The distance between us grew incrementally. A missed birthday here, a clipped phone call there, a Christmas where my mother mentioned 3 separate times in one evening that Derek's firm had just promoted him. By the time I was 27, I was attending family events out of obligation alone, sitting at tables where my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, where every conversation about my life was accompanied by a subtle, collective bracing, as though my answers might be contagious. "Still at the same company?" my aunt would ask. "Still in that apartment? Any news? Any real news?" I would smile. I would say things were going well. I would eat my food and watch the clock. The truth was that things were going extraordinarily well. NovaBridge, the infrastructure software platform I had co-founded at 22 with my partner Danny Chin, had crossed $5 million in annual recurring revenue at year 3, $15 million at year 4, and was now approaching the kind of numbers that made venture capital partners call on Saturday mornings. We had a team of 61 people. We had enterprise contracts with 4 Fortune 500 clients. I had made 7 angel investments in early-stage companies over the past 2 years, 2 of which had already returned multiples. I had not told my family any of this. The decision was not impulsive. I had thought carefully about what it meant to build something real while surrounded by people who had already decided your ceiling was low. There was something clarifying about being underestimated. It stripped every interaction down to its actual content. No one was being generous because of what I had. No one was being careful because of what I could do. What I got from my family was what they actually thought of me, unmediated by money or status, and what I got had been, for years, a consistent and detailed accounting of my shortcomings. I kept records. Not out of bitterness, out of habit. I was a founder. I documented everything. My cousin Brianna told me in March. We were the closest thing either of us had to a genuine sibling. She was the one person in the extended family who had never made me feel like a problem to be solved. And she called me on a Wednesday night with the careful voice of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. "Your dad hired someone," she said. I was quiet for a moment. "What kind of someone?" "An investigator. Private. Derek found someone, former law enforcement apparently. Your dad's paying for it." She paused. "Maya, your mom thinks you've been lying to them for years. About your job, your finances, all of it. They think the apartment is a front for something. They think." "How much?" I said. $8,000. They've already paid half." I sat with that for a moment. $8,000. They had paid $8,000 to prove that their daughter was a failure. Not to discover whether she was successful. To prove, with professional documentation, that she was not. "Hey," I said. "Okay." Brianna's voice went up. "Maya, they're going to find your company. They're going to find everything." "I know. Are you worried?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I'm not." What I did not tell Brianna was that I had spent the following morning on the phone with my attorney, James Okafor, who had been my corporate counsel since year 2 at Novabridge and who had, over the years, developed a precise and efficient manner of handling situations that required both legal clarity and strategic patience. "If a private investigator is conducting a background investigation," James said, "they're going to pull corporate filings, property records, financial disclosures, professional registrations. Everything we've filed is accurate and documented. There's nothing to manage on your end." "I'm not calling about my end," I said. There was a brief pause. "Tell me more." What I told James was this. For the past 14 months, I had been aware of certain financial irregularities connected to my father's side of the family. Not suspicions, documentation. Bank statements forwarded to me by a former employee of my father's business partner. Wire transfer records. Correspondence. I had held this information because I had not yet decided what to do with it and because, despite everything, Gerald Whitmore was still my father. A professional investigator conducting a thorough background check. One that covered the full Whitmore family network as good professional practice would require, might find certain things that I had already found. "Understood," James said. "Do you want me to make a call?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's see how Sunday goes." I did not change anything about my life in the weeks between Brianna's call and Sunday dinner. I did not move accounts, did not alter my corporate profile, did not make any effort to conceal or soften what a thorough investigator would find. I went to the office. I ran my team through a product sprint. I finalized the Series C paperwork with our lead investor, shook hands on a valuation that would have made my father's head swim, and took Danny out for dinner to celebrate 4 years of building something from nothing. "You seem calm," Danny said over wine. "I am calm," I said. "Your family hired someone to investigate you." "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. Danny had met my parents once at a conference where they had appeared unexpectedly, and had watched my mother ask me in front of 3 colleagues whether I had considered going back to finish the degree. She had a specific file in her mind for Gerald and Patricia Whitmore, and it was not a generous one. "What happens at Sunday dinner?" she asked. "Someone learns something they didn't expect," I said. "Which someone?" I took a sip of wine. "That part I'm not entirely sure about yet." The truth was that I had only one piece of the picture. I knew what the investigator would find about me. I knew what the investigator might find about my father depending on how thoroughly he ran the secondary subjects. Family members connected to the primary investigation target, a standard practice in comprehensive background work. What I didn't know was how much of that second envelope would exist, or whether it would arrive in time, or whether my father had been careful enough to make it disappear before anyone looked. I had 4 days to wait. I spent them working. The house I grew up in was a colonial on a tree-lined street in a suburb that took itself seriously. My mother had repainted the shutters since my last visit. A deeper navy now, more formal. The driveway held 3 cars. my parents' sedan, Derek's company lease, and a dark gray sedan I didn't recognize. I parked on the street. I sat for a moment with the engine off. Then I walked up the front steps and rang the bell, because I had not had a key to this house in 4 years. My mother answered in the dress she wore for important occasions. That was the first signal. The second was the dining room. The good china, the extended table, the formal arrangement that meant this was not dinner. This was a proceeding. Derek was already seated, wearing the suit. My aunt and uncle sat to the left. My grandmother occupied her usual chair at the corner with the particular stillness of someone who has decided to witness rather than participate. And at the far end of the table, standing beside a leather satchel on a side credenza, was a man I had never met. He was 60 approximately. Gray at the temples. The kind of posture that comes from years in law enforcement. Upright without being rigid, watchful without being obvious. He wore a plain dark jacket and had the unhurried quality of a man who was not nervous about what he was about to say. My father stood near the window with a glass of water. He did not greet me when I walked in. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they are about to solve. "Sit down, Maya," my mother said. I sat. The dinner was served and largely uneaten. My mother made conversation with the focused efficiency of someone filling time. Derek talked about his Q2 numbers. My aunt asked about grandmother's medication. I ate my food and said little, and the investigator sat quietly with his satchel and did not touch his plate. When the plates were cleared, my father set down his glass. "We'll do it now," he said. My mother turned to face me fully. She folded her hands on the table. "He investigated everything," she announced with the measured precision of someone who had rehearsed this. "Your apartment, your job, your bank accounts. Everything you've told us, or refused to tell us for the past 5 years. We paid for the best, Maya. Former federal agent. 23 years of experience." She paused to let that land. "No more lies." My father nodded once, a single authoritative motion, the gesture of a man closing a case. I looked at them both. Then I looked at the investigator. I said nothing. The investigator, he had introduced himself earlier as Mr. Calloway, no first name offered, reached into his satchel without theater. He produced 2 manila envelopes, both sealed, both labeled. He set them on the table side by side with the care of someone who had done this before and understood that what happened next would not be undone. My mother leaned forward slightly. Derek straightened in his chair. My father's jaw was set. Mr. Calloway looked at the room. "I want to be clear about my practice before I begin," he said. His voice was level and carried no particular emotion. "I don't deliver half-truths. I was retained to investigate Maya Whitmore. In the course of a thorough investigation, professional ethics require that I document all findings relevant to the commissioning family and any associated parties. That is what I have done." He picked up the first envelope. First envelope. Primary subject. Maya Christine Whitmore, age 29. He broke the seal with a letter opener from his jacket pocket. He removed several pages of close-printed text, a color photograph, and what appeared to be a set of financial documents. Ms. Whitmore is the co-founder and chief executive officer of NovaBridge Technologies, an enterprise infrastructure software company. Current verified valuation, $92 million as of a funding round completed this week. He set the first page flat on the table and moved to the next. She holds a controlling equity position and draws a documented annual compensation of $400,000. She is a registered angel investor with 7 active portfolio positions, 2 of which have already produced positive returns. He placed the photograph, a Forbes regional feature from 18 months ago, my name in the caption, face up on the table. Ms. Whitmore has no outstanding debt, no criminal record, and no history of financial irregularity of any kind. He set the first envelope's contents down in a neat stack. The table was completely still. My mother's mouth had opened slightly. Derek was staring at the Forbes photograph with an expression I had never seen on his face. Something between shock and a recalibration happening in real time. My grandmother had put down her water glass very carefully. My aunt had both hands flat on the table. My father had not moved. I looked at him. He was looking at the documents and something in his face had shifted. Not surprise exactly, but a very specific kind of stillness that I recognized in that moment, as a man beginning to calculate what came next. Mr. Calloway picked up the second envelope. Second envelope. He held it for just a moment. Not for effect, I think, but because he was a professional who understood the weight of what he was carrying and was not careless with it. In the course of conducting comprehensive background work on the commissioning family, I identified a pattern of financial activity requiring documentation. He broke the second seal. This envelope contains findings relevant to one party at this table. Exclusively. He looked directly at my father. My mother's fork dropped. The sound was very small in a very quiet room. Gerald Whitmore had always been a precise man. That precision, it turned out, had limits. Mr. Calloway laid the second envelope's contents on the table with the same methodical care as the first. The documents were dense. Bank records, wire transfer logs, a chronological summary prepared in Mr. Calloway's own hand. He did not read all of it aloud. He read enough. Beginning in April of 2021 and continuing through February of this year, he said, Gerald Whitmore executed a series of financial transfers totaling $263,000 from a joint investment account held between himself and Patricia Whitmore. He turned a page. These transfers were made to a secondary account not disclosed on any joint financial filings. The receiving account is registered under a name I will provide in full in the written report. He paused. The pattern is consistent with deliberate concealment. I've included a forensic accounting summary from a third-party firm I retained for verification. My mother had not picked up her fork. She was sitting very still with both hands in her lap, and something had left her face entirely. The rehearsed composure she had carried into this dinner, the certainty she had arranged herself in before I arrived. It was gone. What remained was a woman sitting at a table where a stranger was dismantling her marriage with printed bank records, and she was not making a sound. Derek pushed his chair back. You need to stop. You need to stop right now. Derek. My grandmother's voice was quiet and absolute. Derek stopped. My father had still not moved. He was looking at the documents with the expression of a man who had built a very careful structure and was watching it fail in the specific way he had always known it might. Not with surprise but with a terrible recognition. Gerald, my mother said. Just his name. Nothing else. He didn't look at her. Mr. Calloway gathered both sets of documents into their respective envelopes. He closed his satchel with a quiet click. I'll leave complete copies with all parties as required, he said. My written report is already on file with my agency. If there are questions about methodology or sourcing, I'm available through the contact information in the packet. He stood. Ms. Whitmore, I believe your legal representative may be in touch regarding the documentation. He walked out of the dining room without being shown to the door. A moment later I heard the front door open and close. The room didn't move. I reached into my bag and placed a single business card on the table. NovaBridge Technologies. Founder and co. I've been building this for 7 years, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't tell you because you had already decided what I was. Every dinner. Every question. Every comparison to Derek, to my sister, to anyone but me. I looked at my mother. I kept receipts, Mom. Every dismissal. Every tilted head concern. I documented it the way I document everything, because I knew eventually there would be a moment where the record mattered. I looked at my father. He was looking at the table. I hope whatever you were protecting was worth what it cost, I said. That's not my story to finish. I pushed my chair back and stood. The dinner was fine, I said to my grandmother, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between grief and possibly a long overdue recognition. The shutters look nice too. I walked out. James Okafor called me before I reached my car. Mr. Calloway's agency copied me on the secondary findings as discussed, he said. Depending on how your mother responds to the information, there are several paths available to her. I've drafted a letter she can use if she chooses to pursue civil recovery of the transferred funds. He paused. How are you? Fine, I said. And I was standing on a tree-lined street in the suburb I grew up in, and the evening was cool and my company was worth $92 million and I was genuinely fine. There may be questions about the secondary findings from other family members, James said. Given your involvement in retaining Mr. Calloway. I didn't retain Mr. Calloway, I said. My parents did. I simply didn't interfere with a thorough investigation. Pause. Of course, James said. Get some rest. The next 72 hours moved with the particular speed of things that have been building for years and are finally allowed to fall. My mother called me Monday morning. It was the first time she had called me without an agenda in longer than I could remember. No dinner to schedule, no concern to perform, no comparison to deploy. She cried, which she never did or never let me see. I listened. I did not tell her everything would be fine because I didn't know that it would be, and because she had spent years telling me things would be fine in a tone that meant she had already decided they wouldn't. I did not do that to her. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said. About your company. About any of it. I know, Mom. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that for a moment. About the dinner table. About the tilted head. About the Christmas where my candle was never the brightest in the room and everyone was very comfortable with that. Because you didn't ask, I said. You told. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time. Derek called on Tuesday. His tone was the carefully managed version of a man recalibrating. Not apologetic exactly, not yet, but arriving at the outskirts of it. He mentioned the Forbes photograph 3 times in 5 minutes. I let him talk. At the end of the call he said, I should have paid more attention, and I said, yes, and that was as far as we got, which was further than we had gotten in years. My father did not call. Through James, I learned that my mother had retained her own attorney and was reviewing the documentation from Mr. Calloway's report. The secondary account had been open for nearly 3 years. The transfers were systematic and deliberate. Whatever else they had been, weakness, deception, the architecture of a secret life running parallel to the visible one, they were also, James noted carefully, potentially actionable. I didn't push that door. It wasn't mine to push. What I did on Wednesday morning was go to the office. I walked in at 8, said good morning to the team, got a coffee and sat down at my desk. Marcus had already run the morning stand-up. The Series C was officially closed. NovaBridge's new funding had hit the accounts overnight and the team had put balloons in the conference room, which I quietly appreciated and did not mention. Danny appeared in my office doorway at 9 with 2 cups of coffee and the expression she wore when she already knew the answer to the question she was about to ask. How was Sunday dinner? I looked up from my screen. Educational, I said. She sat down across from me. Your mom. Processing. Your dad. I picked up my coffee. Silent. Danny nodded slowly. She had known me for 7 years. Since the garage, since the 4-person team, since the nights when the product was broken and the runway was thin and the only reason to keep going was that stopping was unthinkable. She had watched me navigate every version of NovaBridge and every version of my family with the same quality of stillness, the same refusal to be rattled by things I had not caused and could not control. For what it's worth, she said, you were right to wait. I know. The timing was perfect, I said. It was perfect. 6 weeks after Sunday dinner, my mother filed for legal separation. I did not celebrate this. It was not a victory, it was a consequence, and consequences are not celebrations. A 29-year marriage had ended at a dining room table over documents a private investigator had been paid to produce. And the only person who had intended any of it was my father, who had, in trying to prove his daughter was nothing, commissioned the tool that proved he was something much more complicated than the precise, controlled man he had always presented himself to be. Grandmother called me in the 5th week. She was the one person in my family who had the specific quality of saying exactly what she meant without requiring a translation. I always thought you were building something, she said. You never said so, I said. You never needed me to, she said. That was the difference between you and the others. You didn't need it. You were going to do it regardless. Pause. I'm sorry it took this long for the room to catch up. That meant more than most things said to me that month. I told her so. NovaBridge closed its first enterprise partnership with a Fortune 100 client in the 8th week after Sunday dinner. The press release went out on a Thursday. Danny texted me a single emoji. Marcus bought the team lunch. I signed the contract at my desk and then sat quietly for a moment with the knowledge that 7 years of refusal to stop, refusal to accept someone else's ceiling, refusal to explain myself to people who had already written the explanation, had produced something real and documented and entirely mine. My mother came to the office in week 10. She had never seen it before. I showed her the floor, the team, the product demos running on the wall screens, the conference room with the company name etched in the glass. She walked through it quietly with the careful attention of someone revising a very long document. She stopped in front of a framed print on the wall near my office door. It was a quote I'd put up in year 2 when the company was burning cash and the team was exhausted and the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Mistook silence for surrender. Never again. He read it for a long time. Is that about us? She asked. I thought about it honestly. It's about everyone who decided the story was over, I said. Before it was. She nodded. She didn't cry this time. She stood straight, with the particular posture of a woman who had rearranged herself around a new set of facts and was still in the early stages of learning how to hold them. I'd like to have dinner, she said. Not a dinner. Just dinner. Hey, I said. Just us. Okay. It was not a reconciliation. It was a beginning, which is a different and more honest thing. Reconciliations are clean and final. Beginnings are uncertain and require maintenance and do not come with guarantees. I was by then very comfortable with beginnings. I had built my entire life out of them. The PI's second envelope was never opened at my request. What my mother did with it was her decision, her life, her reckoning. I had spent 7 years building something they couldn't see. I didn't need to watch the demolition. I had already moved on to the next thing. Always do.